Hey traders, Raghee here, and in this free video we're going to cover topics that sort of start to blur the boundaries between being a futures index trader and a stock trader. And there's a concept that I like to bring up from time to time. If you think about it, if you were to ask someone to deliver you some NASDAQ, what would they deliver you? I mean, would you get a box full of little NASDAQs, or would you literally get a box full of the stocks that are weighted within the NASDAQ with emphasis on the heavily weighted names? So let's tackle that first part. You know, this is something that I think is pretty basic, but it never hurts to cover the basics. So what I like to do is go to a free website. I've been a fan of this one for a long time, totally free. I don't even know the folks. I'm just glad they have it. It is ETFDB. So I'm going to do a search for QQQ, which is the NASDAQ ETF. It basically mimics what would be in the NQ futures. Remember, we're thinking about this from the perspective of being a futures trader. So I click on holdings, and right away, let's make this a little bit bigger. Right away, I can see what the major weighted holdings are. And I think a lot of people would be surprised that a lot of the names that folks talk about as having impact on the NAS really are much further down the line. If we make a cutoff at 3%, notice what names are pretty much going to make up most of this essentially 100 stock weighting. Okay, you got 6 names that account for, take a look here. This is 22, 33, 37, 41, you're talking 45. I'm just roughly just going down the road here, but 45%, almost half the NAS is in the top 6 names, right? So once we get past that, we got Cisco, Intel, Comcast, Pepsi, which is one people overlook, and of course Netflix. But if you think about Netflix weighting in terms of the heavily weighted names like Microsoft, which we'll talk about for sure in the premium video, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Google, which by the way, again, Google and Google combined, I would look at them in combination, would really be the fourth heaviest weighted name in the NAS, right? If they weren't separate. But let's talk about Netflix here for a moment. Netflix is not heavily weighted within the NASDAQ. And the way people carry on about stocks like Netflix and PayPal and Adobe, you think they were much more significant than less than 2%. And yet, while their percentage weighting may not be impactful, when we get to earnings like we do with Netflix, the actual amount of price movement can be very impactful to the underlying ETF and to, of course, NASDAQ futures, the NQ, which is what I have my eye on. So again, we're thinking about this from the perspective of being a futures trader. So does it matter Netflix? Does it matter Microsoft? Do those names matter? Well, of course, we know they do. So the first thing I'm getting asked a lot of is, is there a buy in Netflix as possibly it's going to open somewhere around 318 tomorrow, right? So first of all, gang, remember this. We talk about earnings moves in the futures room all the time because when you are trading Dow, S&P, NASDAQ, you are trading a big box of stocks, right? And this happens to be Netflix being one of the names. This is not a name that's in a trend. We'll talk about a name that we have been playing into earnings, namely Microsoft. We'll talk about that in the premium video. But number one, Netflix would not be a candidate for this. And number two, take a look at the V-score here. This is going to keep you out of trouble. Is Netflix at a buy level today or even before? No, you'll notice that the standard deviations that we are, kind of overstretched, if you will, out on a limb, at that +1, give or take a little bit, +1 standard deviation, this is not in a buy zone. When will it be in a buy zone? I'm quite certain that when we open up tomorrow, we will likely be minimally at the mean, which is one level we could consider. You can see here and here, but I would love to see Netflix down in this area closer to nearly a -0.5, -0.5. That could be very interesting. So a lot of people are asking me, what about Netflix? What I will say could be an even better play would be Roku. Roku, as you guys can see, fell in sympathy as the Netflix streaming story hit devices like Roku that rely on streaming. But think about this for a minute. All the different companies, and it's far more than Hulu and Amazon Prime and Disney. There's a lot more implications for streaming than simply Netflix and some of those big names. But do you think Roku is going to be down for long? Is Roku in an uptrend? Absolutely. Now, when Roku opens down around 105, 106 or so tomorrow, if we can see that Roku has traded down to a level like a +2 standard deviation or just below that, this would be a terrific place instead of putting that capital behind Netflix, or take some of that and think about Roku and how essentially it was unfairly hit by the Netflix story. Now, let me tie this up with the NASDAQ. Do you think the NAS is going to get drugged down? And in fact, it has already been drugged down a little bit by the Netflix story. Let's take a look at that here real quick, because this is important to me. Does this get faded tomorrow? Look, if we can get a little bit more weakness out of the NAS, what's going to happen is, thank you very much, Netflix miss, because what we'd like to see is an opportunity to perhaps buy at a +1 standard deviation as this market trades down to prior support and even the major 7,800 psychological level. 70 points on the NAS is not all that much. So I'm going to keep an eye on this, but take a look at the effect Netflix and all those sympathetic moves have had on the NAS. This is why earnings matter to futures traders. And remember, futures traders, we could take advantage of this move after hours with plenty of liquidity. You know, Netflix sells off. You want to take advantage of that? You can play the NQ futures at 4 p.m., 4:10, right? You know, so keep that in mind. I hope this helps. Think out of the box, because if you think from that futures first paradigm, it's going to open up a lot more. We'll talk about that and more in the premium video. I hope this helps. I'll see you in the next update.